stopping off points. Okay, great, everyone. Thank you for joining, everyone. This is the rock pool project's introduction to rock pooling. As Ben said, we occasionally do a sort of a 6-part introduction to Rocky Shore. This is our condensed version, which I've hopefully pieced together a good crash course of all the information I would have liked to have had when I first set out rock pooling as an adult, not just when I was going out when I was little. Cool, and this is all part of the big rock pool challenge and the national BioBlitz event, which is running over this week. It's been great. I've been seeing lots of finds all over the country, but thank you for coming and joining the online part, which I can participate in, which is great. Cool. So I've split this into 4 parts. One is I'm going to say what is rock pooling and why do we have rock poolings. This is going to be a bit of a side tangent into physics and space, but it's really important to learn about all that stuff to get an understanding of actually what's going on, why we have tides, why we have this amazing ecosystem on Earth, which is the intertidal zone. Once I've given an overview at how tides work, why we have rock poolings, why we can go rock pooling, I'm then going to give a chat about, okay, what do you actually need to go rock pooling? What's the best things to take with you if you've not been rock pooling a while, or you're not sure about what you should actually take with you to get the best experience, and then go through some do's and don'ts of the best practice for rock pooling when you're actually out there exploring the intertidal habitat. Once that's done, I'll then do a very quick, very rapid fire blitz of some rock pool wildlife. You'll see as we get into the session, doing all rock pool wildlife would be very, very hard to do in an hour session. But hopefully I'll get you some nice IDs, some core ID skills, and then some ideas of actually the whole range of wildlife that you can actually find if you go out rock pooling and you know what you're looking for. Right, cool. So, why do we have rock pools? Well, the reason we have rock pools is something called the tides. The tides are the fact that on Earth, twice a day, we have the ocean or the sea, and it comes into the coast and it goes back out the coast. Twice a day, the sea moves and it leaves behind these pools of water that are left there out. You can walk out to them and explore. That's quite unusual if you think about it. You know, why twice a day does the sea move? Why is it not just sat there doing what it comes? And the reason for that is something called tides. There are 2 things going on here. There are tides, which is what we call the movement of the sea in and out, and there are also tides, which is the phenomenon of 2 bodies in space affecting each other through gravity. Is something we call tides, or tidal pulls on each other. This all comes down to some fancy physics that some guy called Isaac Newton came up with about 300 years ago when he was 23. It's quite amazing. It makes me feel a little bit inadequate now I'm 29. I haven't come up with like one of the most amazing theories that's ever come up. But the crux of this fancy maths on the right here is that basically means any 2 things that have mass, anything in the universe, have a force that pull in each other. So the planet Jupiter pulls on the sun pulls on the planet Jupiter, Earth pulls on Jupiter, Jupiter pulls on Earth. Your teddy bear also pulls on the Earth, and the Earth pulls on your teddy bear, and the teddy bear pulls by Saturn. Everything is attracted to everything else in the universe that has mass. But crucially, that depends on what the size of that force is, depending on how big the 2 objects are, their mass, but also crucially how far away they are. The further 2 objects are apart from each other, the weaker that force attracting those 2 objects is. Now, if we're talking about your teddy bear and you, there's very little gravitational force between them because they're very, very small, even though they're very, very close together. But when we talk about big astronomical bodies like the Earth, like the Moon, like Jupiter, like the Sun, they are, even though they're very, very, very far away, they're big enough to have quite a dramatic effect by the attraction of each other to each other. there's lots of cool consequences of this. This is the moon Io. It orbits Jupiter. It goes round and around Jupiter multiple times an hour. And it's so close together that it gets stretched and pulled by Jupiter all the time. It gets heated up and it is constantly spewing out lava all the time because it's being pulled and stretched and pulled and stretched. Every time it gets a little bit closer to Jupiter, it gets stretched out. Every time it goes further away, it gets pushed. It collapses back into itself. So all the time, constantly around Io, there are 40 volcanoes going constantly. It is not a nice place. You would not want to live on Io. On the other side here, this is Pluto and its moon Charon. They're locked together so that they always face each other. The tidal forces between them are so great that they've actually stuck together. If you can just see the animation, the one side of Pluto is always facing the moon. They're linked together, rotating around. If you lived on this side of Pluto here, you would not know that there is a moon of Pluto because they're so locked together. So tides are really interesting. They do lots of effects. We don't really want to be over here. We don't really want to be such strong tides that we turn into a volcanic nightmare. But we also don't want it to be really boring, so they're just permanently locked together and nothing actually happens. Thankfully, we live in a pair of a two-body system called the Earth and the Moon, which is fantastically balanced directly in the middle. The moon is pretty big. It has an effect. It has a large gravitational pull, but it's just the amount of distance away. Not so close that it turns the Earth into, a volcanic nightmare, but also not so far away that it doesn't have any effect at all. It's really nicely positioned closely together, so the effect that we get on Earth is something called the tides. So as the moon is orbiting the Earth, it's constantly pulling on the Earth and everything on the Earth, and that includes the ocean. You'll also notice here that I've got the sun. The sun is very, very, very far away, but it is also absolutely massive. So the sun also has a constant pull on the Earth. That's why the Earth orbits the sun. And sometimes the pull of the sun and the pull of the moon line up or point in opposite directions, but sometimes they're in opposite directions as the moon orbits the sun. These two forces here, the pull of the moon and the pull of the sun, are the things that causes the things that cause the tides on Earth. It's the pulling of the sun and the moon on the water that makes up the ocean and the sea. So what does that actually mean? So here we've got the Earth, we've got the moon here, and because the moon is over here, the Earth is being stretched out. And basically, imagine that you're holding an elastic band on the end of with a big weight on the end, and you're spinning around. As you spin around with that, you can imagine the elastic band stretching. That's what's happening as the moon is orbiting the Earth. The Earth is actually being stretched out, elongated towards the moon. We don't really see effects of that on the actual shape of the Earth. It's not like Io, where again the whole thing is cracking and crumbling. What we do see is the oceans get pulled out or drawn towards the moon and away from the moon when they're at the points where the moon is facing when you're facing towards the moon. That means we get two things that happen. We have a high tide and a low tide. At high tide, when we're facing the moon, we're on this side of the planet here, we are positioned at that bulge in the water. So the water is its highest point. But when the Earth rotates, we get back to this point where we're facing perpendicular or away from the moon, and that means we sort of slide into this area where the water gets drawn outwards or away from where we are. But then the Earth rotates again, and then we get back to high tide, and then it rotates another quarter around, and it goes back to low tide. And then one day later, one full rotation of the Earth later, we get back to where we started, where you're again facing towards where the moon is. And then as each day goes by, we see this happen twice a day. So as we get to facing away or towards the moon, we see the water comes in, rushing into the sort of that bulge of water that's facing the moon. As you're floating perpendicular to it, it gets pulled back out. And this is why we get 2 high tides and 2 low tides twice a day, or just under that, because technically the moon is orbiting the moon. The moon is orbiting the Earth, so it takes slightly longer for the Earth to rotate and catch back up with where the moon's got to. But we're not actually going to delve into that. But in general, 2 high tides a day, 2 low tides a day. This is why we get tides. This is why rock pooling is possible, because of the pull of the moon on the ocean, or the water in the ocean. Now, I've got to admit Zoe Gardner, Ben. Can I press that, or are you? I caught you out, you know. I can click it. There we go. Okay, we'll jump in. Okay. When we bring the sun back into that picture, you remember the sun and the moon are both pulling on the oceans. When we have the moon and the sun basically on opposite sides of each other, so we get moon, earth, sun, or earth, moon, sun, they're all that gravitational pull gets put into one direction. They're all pulling out. So that bulge, compared to, if I jump back to the last one, there you go, that bulge gets drawn much higher. That means that bulge is to a greater extent, which means the water or in the ocean, it gets drawn to a much greater extent. So we get mean high water springs and mean low water springs. The tide rushes out much further and to a much higher extent than what would be usual at these times. Once a month, because the moon is orbiting more or less once a month, it lines up twice a month with the direction that the sun's in. The contrast is that is when the sun and the moon are in opposite directions. They're actually cancelling each other out to some extent. So the pull of the moon is pulling the water over this way, and the pull of the sun is pulling it in this way. So you get these much less bulges of water. That means we get mean high water neaps and mean low water neaps. So in compared to the average high water and the average low water, the water is just not moving out as far or as far out or as far into the shore as is usual. I mean, you see from here, there's a load of creatures that we saw in the previous images that you cannot get to or see at a mean low water neap, because the water is just not going out that far. Hopefully I've not fried your brain with complicated direction of the sun and the moon, but you know, this is basically the 3 sort of things you need to remember are that there are different circumstances of the position of the sun and the moon. That means we get very different tidal heights, called spring tides and neap tides, and regular old normal tides. Hopefully this animation is coming through, but this all puts it together hopefully into one picture. This is the Earth. Sorry, this is the moon orbiting around the Earth. When the moon is pointing in line with the sun, it gets drawn out. The water gets drawn out to a much greater extent. When it's perpendicular to the sun, or an angle to the sun, it's much more squashed. Here we are whizzing round and round and round. This is why again we get those 2 high tides and 2 low tides twice a day. But over the month, every single month, the heights of these the highest highs and lowest lows change every single day in a cycle once a month, all to do with the position of the moon. Cool. Now, hopefully you'll understand then that because the water's moving in and out at different heights across the month and going in and out all the time at a sort of cyclic rate, the rocky shore where you go rock pooling is not the same in the entire intertidal zone. If you go rock pooling up here on the coast, you will find very, very different animals than what you find on the bottom of the coast, all to do with those changing heights of the tides, and also to do with how much on average that section of shore is covered by the water once a month. It's roughly split into 3 different zones. So there's a high water, a middle water, and a low water, and then 2 extreme versions of that, which are the splash zone. It's called the splash zone for obvious reasons. It's the area that basically only gets splashed by water as waves come in. But then the other zones and the sublittoral fringe, which is the very, very bottom of the intertidal zone. These are all the areas that have various different times of how often they are covered by water twice a day. So starting at the top, we have the high shore. This is the section of water that is section of the shore that is out the water more than in. So if you're at the very top of the shore and you've got the tide coming in and out, for the majority of the time each day, the water is further out than this region. So it's only ever covered when the tide has come in to the highest extent. And you get very, very different animals than what you'd find lower down. The main ones being a few different types of seaweed called spiral racks or channel racks, but you also start to get animals like barnacles and limpets. All of these animals that live in the high shore have to be able to survive twice a day, being high and dry out of the water with the sun bearing down on them, but also twice a day having salt water poured on them. That's pretty hard for an animal to deal with. Salmon do it. Salmon don't come out of the water, but they do massive physiological changes when they swim from the ocean out into the rivers, the freshwater. For these animals here, they have to survive being out of the water, in salt water, and then when they're rained on, survive having fresh water. That's absolutely massive changes in the environment these animals have to live through, for which very few animals are actually capable of dealing with the physiological changes that requires. So there's very few animals that live in this high shore, but they are very, very hardy and very, very cool. You get barnacles, limits, but you do get, again, some seaweed, some algae is able to survive at this high shore thing, but it has to be able to survive being dried out twice a day, or nearly dried out. Things that are very delicate and evaporate or have water lost from their bodies very, very quickly cannot survive in the high shore. As you get further down the shore, we get to the mid-shore. And this is where we're in this sort of middle ground where we're not high and dry most of the time, but 50% of the time, or 50% of the time of the day, you're out of the water, and 50% of the time you're in the water. That means that you're not fully drying out normally, but you do have to have the ability to survive in the water and potentially out the water. You get sort of larger seaweed, so bladderwrack, which is a really nice little seaweed with these little bobbles going all around. Once you've found bladderwrack, you can be reasonably sure that you are out of the high shore. And once you start finding these sort of red seaweeds, which are very, very different a branch of the tree of life to these brown and green seaweeds, then you know you're in the mid-shore. And you also start to get some actually more complicated food chain. So there's more animals, there's more algae and stuff that can live on the rocks in the midshore. So you start to get more plants, which means there's the ability to have more herbivores that eat the plants or the algae. And then from that, you also start to get predators. You start to get more complicated food chains of animals eating plants, animals eating animals, animals eating plants and stuff. So 2 typical species that you'd be able to find in sort of the midshore are shore crabs, probably the most common-ish crab you'll find in the UK, and also dog whelks, a type of predatory sea snail. Going out even further, so if you've gone out at that low tide, you'll be able to walk out further and further and further. We get to the low shore. This is the region that, for the majority of the time, it's actually underwater. It's actually in the sea, but depending on what the stage of the spring and neap tide cycle it is, you will be out of the water for more or less time. So this is the region where if any animal living in this little site in the sea, they will be in the ocean more than they are out. There's a lot more biodiversity going on in the low shore, so you will really start to see loads of different types of seaweeds. Red seaweeds get a lot more pronounced, so red seaweeds are present in the midshore, but they'll be much more abundant in the low shore. Many different types of animal species. So most people, when they're rock pooling, what they aim to do is get down to the low shore, because there is just a lot more to find. So you get really nice big colonies of sponges, some bigger daily anemones and different types of anemones, and you start to get different and more unusual types of different species. So you'll start to find edible crabs, or pasty crabs if you live in Cornwall, versus the more ubiquitous jaw crab, which is found everywhere. The real telltale species that, if you want to know you've moved from the mid-shore to the low shore, is this switch from bladder wrack, which we saw earlier, to this saw wrack, which has these teeth going down the fronds, and very few or none at all of those little bobbles or bladders on their fronts. And again, high biodiversity. So if you're going rock pooling, if you want to go rock pooling and see the most wildlife, I would really recommend trying to get down to the low shore. Definitely spend some time exploring the high shore, because there are some unique, amazing animals that you will not find anywhere else on those high shores and the mid shores. But for the greatest bang for your buck, head down to the low shore. Now we get to the really cool, really exciting. If you're a hardcore rock pooler, what you actually don't want to do is get down to the sublittoral fringe. So we've got the splash zone up here. We've got the intertidal zone here, going from high shore, mid shore, and low shore. The sublittoral fringe is this region right at the bottom of the shore, which is only really exposed at those extreme spring tides. There are some regions that are basically only ever exposed from the tide only withdraws to that point at the highest spring tides, which happen at the equinoxes, so in spring and in autumn, when the days are equal. That's to do with the complicated angle at which the moon orbits the moon. The moon is slightly better aligned with where the sun is in space rather than at any other time of the year. So best time to go rock pooling is actually the equinox. So put that in your diaries to be sure. But you can mostly get out again to the sublittoral fringe if you're heading out to those spring tides that happen once a month. It's almost always underwater because it's only exposed at those spring tides. It's a very stable environment, so for the majority of the time, these are animals that just live in the sea, essentially, or a very shallow sea. And it's where you can start to find really big seaweed or kelp, sorts of things called oarweed. It's got high productivity, so there's so much sunlight bearing down on this very shallow bit of sea that's just the shallowest you can get without being either on land or in the intertidal zone, which means it has a lot of sun, so there has a lot of food for plants or algae, and therefore there's lots more for herbivores to eat. Therefore, there's lots more for predators to eat. So you get loads more wildlife again living in this sublittoral fringe, and you can quite often find species that are not quite as adapted or not really used to being out or being exposed by the tide. So you can find some really unusual, exciting things that you would not normally ought to find on a general normal tide. So things like spider crabs, stalk jellyfish are very cool to find. You will pretty your best bet is to go to the sublittoral fringe to find these, but you can find them in deep rock pools around the midshore. But you also get, things like sea urchins. Basically, the species that you find when you're at the sublittoral fringe, you can tell you're at the sublittoral fringe because every rock you're picking up has something even more amazing that you've never seen before. So once you've got your eye into rock pooling, once you've been to those low shores, get a date in your diary to find a spring tide. Definitely put the date in the diary to go rock pooling at the full moon or new moon that is the closest to the equinox, and head out and explore the sublittoral fringe, because it is amazing when you get the tide right and head out and find these amazing creatures that you would not normally be able to see.
Christophe, we have a comment from.
Yes, that's a question. I was just saying this is a pausing point. So yeah, please go for it.
Yeah, we just have a comment from Liz Sweet, who says that in the Channel Islands we see Asian shore crabs in the high shore zone. They seem to be pushed up by the green shore crabs.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's kind of the opposite of what happens in. Also in Cornwall, we're sort of losing the green shore crab. Like, they seem to be declining in abundance, but they've not been replaced by anything. They're just going down. But that's kind of interesting to say. Maybe the Asian shore crabs have like pushed the shore crabs out, and they're having to like adapt them. That would be really interesting. I would love to see some like actual data on that. If there is this shift in niche being imposed on the green shore crab. I guess the one thing that makes me that sounds quite bad, but the green shore crab is like the top 10 invasive species of the planet. So it's native to the UK, but it is devastating the Pacific coast of America and Australia. So maybe they deserve to be picked on a little bit here. If they're just being pushed around the shore a little bit, opposed to like completely wide. But maybe that's not a good opinion to have. But yeah, no, that's a really interesting dynamic that I didn't know about. I'm presuming if they've got to the Channel Isles, they will definitely probably get to the UK at some point.
Well, they are in the UK, in
Okay.
the east of the country.
Okay.
Hemigrapsis taxonomy. Liz, I don't know if you've been able to record any Asian shore crabs as part of our national BioBlitz, but if you have that opportunity, it's still running until the end of the week. We're going to mention it later, so it'd be amazing to get that recorded. Excellent. Liz's goal is to get one of those Asian shore crabs. Go get one, Liz.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, over to you, Christophe.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So hopefully I've done some persuading to you to think that rock pooling is amazing. It's kind of unique to Earth. Like, the moon is sort of the perfect distance away to have this amazing effect that maybe doesn't happen anywhere else in the universe. And you want to head out. So we're going to talk about, okay, you check the tide times, you know when these spring tides are coming, or you know when low tide's going to be, and you're going to head out and do some rock pooling. What I've hopefully played you on to take away from that is that make sure you explore the whole intertidal range. So don't just find the first rock pool you see and think, oh, here's a rock pool. All rock pools are the same. The moment you go out that little bit further out into shore, you will find very, very different things. It sounds like Liz is already on it with knowing the differences, also observing different species that are changing over that distance. So, what do we recommend you bring with you if you're going rock pooling? Cool. Quick rock pooling checkbook. First thing, check the times, the tide times. My favorite one is tidesforfishing.com. It's pretty comprehensive, lets you view in detail about, it's basically a month in advance, and see those very good details between the heights of the shore, and it's pretty comprehensive based for the whole of the UK, and I'm pretty sure wider than that, so I'm pretty sure the Channel Islands would be included in that. The equipment, all I'd actually really recommend if you want to go rock pooling is sensible outdoor clothing and footwear. I've been rock pooling spontaneously on walks, just with good outdoor clothing. Best for the weather, you could always put layers on, you can't always take them off, all that sort of general outdoor essential clothing advice. Apart from having, again, good appropriate clothes for the weather, the most important thing I say is good shoes. What type of shoes you bring is kind of up to your preference. So wellies or wetsuit boots are both perfectly good. Obviously, wellies are waterproof and great, but only up to a certain vital point. So it depends how much you want to get involved and dive into some rock pools. My preferred one in the summer is to go with some wetsuit boots, but if I'm rock pooling in the winter, I don't really want to get wet feet if it's very, very cold, and I'll go with wellies. But to be honest, old rubbish trainers are also great, as long as they still have good grip, because that's the most dangerous thing that can happen to you when you're rock pooling. You're exploring around crags, mixed environment, very complicated bits of topography. You want to have good shoes with a good grip to minimize your risk of slipping. That is actually all I would say you would need to go rock pooling, apart from most likely going with someone else just in case something does happen to you, so you could have a buddy just to make sure you're both safe and well and come back together. The optional extras I would say are camera and a phone, preferably with iNaturalist installed, which Ben will go through in a minute at the end. That's just nice to, because it's really nice to take photographs of stuff. Phone cameras are getting pretty good now to take macro photographs with. My preferred camera is one called Olympus Tough. I think most people who get into rock pooling at some point get an Olympus Tough because it is fantastic camera for macro things, so taking in really good zoomed in photographs of creatures, and it is also drop proof to something like 2 meters and also waterproof, which is great for sticking a camera right into a rock pool. You can also bring a bucket, or in my case, I normally just take an old Tupperware box from a takeaway. That's good. Most rock pool species will be fine being picked up and put in a bucket for a bit. We tend to not advise people to use nets, because what nets do is they lose your ability to feel how sensitive you are prodding or poking around a rock pool. So if people get a net, they tend to get carried away and will jam it into crevices, and they will not know how much force they are applying to the creature they're trying to pick up. So we don't necessarily recommend going out with nets. We also don't say no nets at our events. There are some places and some organizations that say you should not use a net, so be aware if you're going out with different organizations, they might have slightly different rules, but our other moment is you don't need a net. Most things you can find in a rock pool you'll be able to catch and hold in a bucket or a food container, just using your hands, depending how brave you are. Do's and don'ts. The first one is, for the safety of the wildlife, put everything back where you found it. Lots of different reasons for that. The main one is just animal welfare. There are lots of different animals that live in rock pools, some with really complicated, interesting biology, so things that mate for life. So if you find a worm pipefish and you pick it up and you go, oh, I found a worm pipefish, and you wander over to a different rock pool and put it back in, what you've done there is you've separated it from its mate, which it was planning to spend the rest of its life together with, which isn't great. So you should put everything back where you found it. There are also things like, if you pick up a very big crab and move it into a smaller rock pool, there might be another big crab in there and they're not going to be very happy. So most things will be where they want to be. So if you do pick anything up, make sure, even if you're carrying it around in a bucket, try to put everything back in the same place that you found it. That especially counts for rocks. So what a lot of people do when they're rock pooling is they pick up a big rock, they go, oh wow, there's a load of stuff up here, they pick it all up, they wander off, they take photographs of it, they release that stuff, and then they forget that rock that they've just turned over is now in a completely different position to what it was. You will get a lot of seaweed that can only survive, and animals that can only survive when they're submerged in water or not in direct sunlight. So if you've picked up a big rock and turned it over, you've probably, and you leave it like that, you have probably killed every single thing that is underneath that rock. And what you've also probably done is killed everything that is on top of the rock, because all the thing that was on top of the rock, happily in the sun, out of the water, is now underwater. So please, 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 if you pick up any rocks, put them back in the same space. I quite routinely, when you're rock pulling, you will get an iron and you will be able to see a rock that has been recently turned over, and all the creatures underneath it have dried out and stuff. Right. If you can spot that and you think someone's done it recently, then I'd probably put it back over. Again, there's this bit of a blurred line where rock's been turned over, but everything's died on it, so stuff will start colonizing it. Then it's, but you've still got sort of the shells and stuff like that. It's a bit of a complicated of when you should turn it back over. Basically, I'd ask for advice if you're a rock pull project event to say, okay, what should you do with this rock? But essentially, please, when you're rock pulling, put everything back as you found it. Don't leave creatures in buckets for long periods of time. It's okay to take a crab or something out, put it in a bucket, take some nice photographs of it. But if you have an animal in a little tiny pocket of water being blown in the sun, that water is going to get very, very, very warm, and it either is going to die of heat exhaustion or it's going to run out of oxygen. It's a bit like putting you in a sealed container without any air. So don't leave creatures in buckets. If you do see someone who has had a crab, they've picked up a crab, they've wandered over to their grandparents on the other side of the beach and they've just left it on their side, maybe politely say, hi, this crab probably is looking a bit bad and wants to go back. Obviously that's up to your discretion about how confident you're feeling in that, but for your sake, if you're rock pulling, make sure you're just constantly either refreshing the water that you have in your buckets, or you're just keeping an animal in a bucket for the minimum amount of time you can. For your safety, make sure you pick up and put down rocks carefully. The worst injuries I've had are from things called keelworms or barnacles. They're very, very sharp. If you pick up a rock that is too heavy for you, it can slip out of your hands. And these keelworms are very, very sharp, and they will draw blood just from the rock slipping out of your hands. You can wear gloves and the like, but again, the main thing to do is just be careful picking up rocks, and don't pick up a rock that is out of sight, too big for you. Oh, I like if you've put old running shoes with drainage holes, Ben. That sounds pretty good. Cool. Okay. So hopefully you're feeling ready. You know what you need to bring. You understand the tides. You know when to go rock pooling. You know how to go rock pooling. I'm now going to blitz through some rock pool wildlife. As you'll hopefully learn, this is going to be very tricky for me to do in an hour session, let alone about 10 minutes or so that we've got left. But hopefully I'll get an impression on you and give an impression of to you of the types of things that you can find when you're rock pooling, and make it more likely that you will head out and go rock pooling. Cool. Okay, so what can you find rock pooling? I live in Derbyshire at the moment, which is famously rock poolless. It has no coastline. I go for walks, and what I routinely see are birds. Different types of birds: geese, robins, blackbirds, and like. Some people very much like birds, but birds are actually all the same. They all have 2 legs, they all have 2 arms, they've got 4 limbs and a beak. That describes every single bird you can ever see. It also describes every single vertebrate you can see. So that describes all frogs, all squirrels, minus the beak. But they all have 4 limbs. Basically, all animals you'll see on a normal walk are identical, evolutionary speaking. When you go rock pooling, you will not find things that have 4 limbs. You will find things that have 8 limbs, you'll find things that have 10 limbs, you'll find things with 100 limbs, you will find things with 1 mouth, 2 mouths, 2 bottoms, 5 arms. You can find the entire tree of life out when you go rock pooling. You will find squat lobsters, you'll find nudibranchs, you'll find brown seaweeds, red seaweeds, green seaweeds, brittle stars, sea spiders, chitons, polyplacophora, mussels, different types of fish, different types of crab, different scallops, different sea snails, different polychaetes, different starfish, hermit crabs, sea anemones, echinoderms, mollusks. There is there is the introduction, what can you find rock pooling is actually introduction to zoology for first year university degree, right? I cannot talk to you about 10 minutes of what you can find rock pooling. What I do want to impress on you is that when you first go rock pooling, you will probably not know if something fits into animal, mineral, or vegetable, because there is so much diversity that you can find when you're rock pooling. Two things that you find rock pooling will not share a common ancestor, probably that goes back 350 million years or so. Well, first of all, birds, which share a common ancestor about 60 million years or so ago. So I'm not going to talk about all animals you find rock pooling, but hopefully this has given you an idea of it's amazing to go rock pooling because it's one of the easiest way that you can go and appreciate the entire diversity of life that you get when you're on the entirety of biodiversity we have on Earth. What I am going to talk about is some sort of go-to best bang for your buck starter rock pool species. So crustaceans are a branch of the tree of life. They encompass crabs, which is what most people associate with rock pooling. So there's quite a few of those. We have the true crabs. We have the shore crab. If you go rock pooling anywhere in the UK, brackets maybe not Cornwall anymore, you will find a green, probably find a green shore crab. They have these nice little 5 teeth around on their carapace. They're nice sort of like greeny color, sort of red, but sometimes going into red. The juveniles are really wildly colored. They can actually change their color over time. It's really, really interesting. But this is your basic common shore crab you'll find rock pooling. You will also possibly find an edible crab or a pasty crab. So these crabs have this sort of bevel going all the way around inside them. If you imagine holding on like this, it kind of looks like a pasty or a Cornish pasty, which is, I think, the preferred name. Well, my preferred name for them anyway. They're great. You can actually eat these, but most of the ones you'll find in a rock pool will not cover the landing side, which I can't precisely remember of you, but I don't think we've ever found one that would be legally over the 25 centimeter landing size or but they are very different and very, very cool. You will find, once you get your eye in, a velvet swimmer. These are also called devil crabs. They again have these very sharp, spiny teeth going around their carapace. Their most notable feature is their bright red shining eyes. That's why they're called devil crabs. They're also called devil crabs because you will know when you find one because they are vicious. They will chase you round a rock pool. They are really aggressive. They've got this sort of very thin, light armor. They're not quite as tanked as the other one. So they make up with that for just pure aggression. They will swipe at you, chase after you. A very, very big one is quite a challenge to try and capture and hold. But you can get some nice little sized ones, which again are still very aggressive, but they're just less likely to give you a nip. If you're lucky enough to live in Cornwall, ooh, what happened there? We disappeared. Oh, my nice photos of Rizzo's crabs are going. I'm going to quickly stop them from disappearing because that's just rude. Why are you disappearing? Furrowed crab. Okay, we need a photo of a Rizzo's and a Montague's crab. Furrowed crabs, or specifically Montague's crabs, are basically only found in the southwest of the UK. They are probably definitely in the Channel Isles. I'd be very surprised if they're not in the Channel Isles. They're called furrowed crabs because they've got these ridges all around their carapace. They are really tanked units with like loads and loads of armor. They're the exact opposite of the velvet swimmer crab in the fact that they are sometimes called pebble crabs because you can just hold them in the palm of your hand and they will just curl up into a ball and present to a pebble. They're very, very nice, very sweet. They're probably my favorite true crab. When you get into rock pooling, you learn that there's a difference between a Montague's furrowed crab and a Rizzo's crab. And you will spend ages trying to find a Rizzo's crab and also think you found a Rizzo's crab because you found a Montague's crab with slightly hairy legs, which is what they are, and which is how you identify a Rizzo's crab. You will know you found a Rizzo's crab because they have really, really, really hairy back legs, and they're also only found really in the low shore. So that's a nice sort of species pair that once you got your eye in to be able to try and find and look out for. Also in the crustaceans, we have false crabs. So all true crabs are crabs that have had their entire telson, their tail, folded around and fused to their body. False crabs are all the species that look like crabs, but they've not quite had that telson clamped back together. And that includes porcelain crabs. These are really nice little nifty small crabs that live underneath rocks. They're sort of like flattened, so they can live right and underneath the rock. You know, you'll pick one up and you'll find loads of them, basically living in the tiny little gaps that was in between the rocks. You get two different types: the broad-clawed porcelain crab and the long-clawed porcelain crab. There's some limerick to try, or tongue twister, between a broad-clawed porcelain crab and a long-clawed porcelain crab that we need to make up at some point. Again, two different species, really nice, both found underneath rocks. One is quite hairy and has these very broad claws, and the other is a long claw with these very thin looking claws. Two nice species to try and look out for. Broad-clawed porcelain crabs tend to be in the places that I've rock pooled, way more common than long-clawed ones, but some places you will find more long-clawed than broad-clawed. Seems to be something unique, or the distribution changes around the country. Going to my favourite, hermit crabs. Hermit crabs, everyone enjoys finding a hermit crab. These are species of crabs that have adapted to live inside empty snail shells. So they have a very coiled body that wraps all around, and they use these empty snail shells as body armor to protect them from predators. There are two kinds that you will find rock pooling in the UK. The common hermit crab, which is this one here, which is sort of browny coloured. It has one really big claw and one very small claw. And the alternative is, if you're down in Cornwall or Devon now, you will also find the St. Piran's crab, which has only just expanded its range to the UK, or when I say just, turned up in about 2016 or so. These are very, very different to the common hermit crabs. So they have two equally sized claws, and they're very, very reddish in colour, or sort of bright red. And they also have these disco ball eyes that are pretty unmistakable. And they also have these nice sort of really blue highlights on them as well. Great animal to find. They're absolutely fantastic. I spent 2 years of my life studying these and how they came to the UK and what they're doing here. They're great. Please send photos or other than to iNaturalist, because it's really great to see, or interesting to see, how they're spreading across the country. And it was a volunteer citizen science event that these were first found at, which is really great, interesting for regular people to go out rock pooling and go, hey, I found a weird crab here. Is this something new? Yes, it is. Cool. Okay, I'm going to check the time. I'm going to blitz through mollusks. The two mollusks that I want you to basically look out for, or have a think about when you're first rock pooling, is two different types. One are called periwinkles.
Sorry, Christophe, just before you get into mollusks, I'll just pass on a comment from Liz again, from the Channel Islands, saying that, just confirming that they do have Montagues and Risso's crabs there, and potentially also the jaguar round crab, Xantho paressa, but Liz hasn't found one of them herself. I just looked up on on iNaturalist. It hasn't been recorded close to the Channel Islands, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been recorded on other platforms there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to. They look very, very similar to Montague's crabs. Although it's weird, they're interesting. They're in sand, because you don't normally see them. Anyway, sorry, we're getting distracted. I need to blitz through mollusks.
Yes, go for mollusks.
How do I get back? Where are we going? Can I get back? There we go. Okay, cool. Right. Ooh, oh. Mollusks, periwinkles, and top shells. Lots of different types of periwinkles, lots of different types of top shells. The reason you know you're looking at a periwinkle versus a top shell is when you flip them over and look at the way they come out of their shell. They have something called an operculum, which blocks that opening. The periwinkles have a tear-shaped one, and the top shells have essentially a perfectly circular one. Again, lots of different types of ones: painted top shells, grey top shells, I have Ben. Help me out. I've had a brain.
Oh, purple top shell.
Purple top shell. There we go.
Or flat top shell,
Flat
sometimes
top
called.
shell. Loads of different types, and then also flat periwinkles and common periwinkles. Again, loads of different types of these ones, but it's quite easy to split them into one or the other because they will have this tear-shaped operculum versus a round operculum. That's all the ones that I'm going to talk you through in like detail. But I do want to say is go around, you know, when you go rock pooling, you will start to find wackier and wackier creatures. So this is one of my favorite finds that I found with Laura after a few years of Laura Coles, when they were director. It is a decorator crab. This is a tiny little species of crab that decorates itself in seaweed. It gathers up the seaweed and then sticks it to itself because they've got little sticks on it. Hooks on it, which uses a hook seaweed. We have worm pipefish. These are again great. They're very closely related to seahorses. So the males look after the eggs. We have snake lox anemones, which you'll probably find lots of if you go rock pooling. But what you should also do is go out at night with a UV torch because they glow really, really incredibly brightly under UV. So there's levels upon levels of getting into rock pooling. You know, night rock pooling is amazing because most rock pooling species seem to be nocturnal. So actually, they'll be clambering around, running around everywhere, which is great. Again, you can go rock pooling for the first time and find absolutely amazing things that no one's ever seen before. So this is a rainbow sea slug. It was found by a great colleague now of the rock pool project called Nikki. This was her first time rock pooling, and she found a species of nudibranch that had never been seen in the UK mainland before. It was amazing and wonderful and is incredible. And there are still new stuff out there that if you go out and look long for long enough, you will find stuff. Cool. Okay, great. So overview. Hopefully I've got some impression of your mind about how the tides work and how that fits into the tidal cycle and when you should go rock pooling and why you should go rock pooling at different times of the month. You've learned how to look after yourself, others, and wildlife. You know, basically going out with good outdoor clothing and limiting the amount of times you pick up and move around wildlife. And you've also learned some rock pool basic ID or stuff that is interesting that you can look out for when you do go out rock pooling. That said, rock pooling, learning to ID every single rock pool species is very, very hard because it encompasses basically all wildlife, the entire biodiversity of the earth, which is a challenge, but also fantastically exciting for us to for you as a person who can go out and walk onto a beach and discover the entire amazingness of biodiversity that we have on Earth. That's everything from me. I know we're coming, that's bang on 8 o'clock. I'm happy to stay around and answer questions, but I'll quickly pass over to Ben, who's just going to introduce the National BioBlitz and the Big Rock Pool project in general, and how to get involved in the rock pool project more. If hopefully I've spent the last hour persuading you how great rock pooling is.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Christophe. And I should extend to you I was going to say virtual round of applause, but I'm going to actually give
thank you.
Applause. But there is a button, isn't there, for people to extend their applause as well. Where is that? React. There you go. Excellent. Thank you very much. And giving Brian Cox a bit of a run for his money at the start there, I noticed. So cool. So yeah, the Rock Pool project and the National BioBlitz. So we as part of our major project, which is called the Big Rock Pool Challenge, we're running the National BioBlitz at the moment. Hopefully, many of you will have already heard it. Some of you maybe have collected data for it already. And there's an opportunity for you to get involved with the Rock Pool project from anywhere around the coast of the country. So, and we're very keen to cover as much of the coastline as possible. So please do, if you'd like to find out more, sign up. The Big Rock Pool Challenge itself is a national project, and we're at the early stages of it. establishing our volunteer hubs in Falmouth and Plymouth. We've completed that stage now, and the National BioBlitz is moving on to the next steps. So we're going to be looking to set up 6 new volunteer hubs by the end of 2025. So if you're interested at all in getting a bit more involved, please do go to our website and just check out that project generally.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you, Ben.
Cool.
I will jump on to the next slide, or I'll give people a minute if they want to scan that QR code, but I can jump back to it if people want it. But I think it's pretty easy to go to the rockpoolproject.com and everything should be, or don't, rockpoolproject.co.uk and everything should be accessible from there, shouldn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. That's all you need to do.
Cool, great. Are there any questions? And I've also got the link here to the Rockpool Project, the Rockpool Project's official written down guide if you want to read through it. It's also got a nice video featuring Ben rockpooling there as well, which is a good fun. Which was was it the Marine Conservation Society that helped?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
That's how I got to know Ali, one of our other directors.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Christophe. We have a question from, or a comment, I think, which could also be a question from Rutu. I've lost the chat now. There we are.
I've got it here. So she says,
yeah,
"Would love to find a seahorse. Came across one on night. I didn't think you could." So I don't think a seahorse would live in a rock pool. It has to be a pretty big rock pool to be able to survive. I mean, you get some pretty big rock pools, but general rock pools, I say you wouldn't get a seahorse. I think you might be referring to, or maybe I misspoke and talked. I was talking about worm pipefish, which are very, very closely related to seahorses. They have that sort of like long sort of like snout, and they are really exciting, interesting because they also have that same behavior of seahorses that everyone knows about seahorses, that the male seahorse looks after the eggs, or cares for the eggs.
Thank you, Christophe. And I've never seen a seahorse myself, but it's not impossible to see one if you go snorkeling in a seagrass bed. That'd be the place to find them. Any other questions? So feel free to unmute yourself and or to raise your electronic hand if you'd like to ask a question. I think you've clearly been very comprehensive, Christophe.
They're all still trying to get their head around the combination of the moon and the sun. Okay, we got a thank you. There we go.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, we'll call that a night. Lots of thank yous coming in. No, we've got some thank yous coming in. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's been a real pleasure being involved with these webinars during the National BioBlitz. Good luck. We're going out rock pooling. Hopefully you can do it as part of the National BioBlitz, but whenever you go out, do have fun. As Christophe said, all this information is available on our website. So yeah, make use of that.